Segus Kanagoa. Today I'd like to talk to you about the lands of my people. That is the lands of the people of Kahnawake. As you know, or may not know, Kahnawake is located about 9 miles southwest of Montreal Island. And it is now approximately 4 by 6 miles in area. That is about 10 by 6 kilometers. And on Kahnawake lives approximately 5,500 Mohawk Iroquois people. Prior to that, our specific land, as recognized by the King of England and originally by the French King, was at this point approximately 28 miles by 28 miles. That is to say, from the Chateauguay River to the west to highway number 15 to the east, and down to approximately St. Matthew. If you ever travel to the United States, you'll see that there's a big cement plant. That was one of the corners approximately of the territory that was recognized as being ours for our use, keeping in mind that our ancestors were agricultural people, and we used to have large cornfields and tomato fields and so forth. And now we live on approximately 4 by 6 miles, and on that land we have had a lot that is not used by us because there are 2 major highways, 132, 138. There are 2 major hydro lines, one going to the southwest, one going to the southeast. 2 railroad tracks, one going to the southwest, one going to the southeast. 2 bridges, approaches on 2 bridges, the Mercier Bridge, which is famous to a lot of people around here, and the railway CPR Bridge, or Conrail Bridge, that is also on the Kahnawake Reserve. And then you have, least but not least, the St. Lawrence Seaway, which cuts off most of the water line that or water's edge that our people used to enjoy. The people were scattered over this wide territory. As I said, they were agricultural people and their houses were scattered, but by the fact that all these service routes were put through our territory, the people did not want to live on one side and have their families living on the other side. Consequently, we all ended up in a 1 square mile area near the St. Lawrence River, between the CPR Bridge and the Chateauguay River. And on that we have a lot of the services on our territory which we took over ourselves. We have our administrative offices, we have our court, we have our justice system, we have our hospital, we have our recreational areas, some social buildings. We have, for instance, we have a Legion Hall, because we have a lot of veterans in Kahnawake. We have a Knights of Columbus, we have members of the Knights of Columbus, we have the Moose Lodge. These are non-Indian clubs, but basically non-Indian founded clubs. And then we have Marina, we have the Parish Hall, and the people live here and still are restricted by government regulations as we see them being restricted. And we're part of the Iroquois Confederacy, which is made up of 6 nations. Originally 5 nations, but the Tuscarora just joined us. And I'd like to point out to you the extent of our territories in the past. I will show you a map which needs to be revised again because your history books state that Iroquois people did not exist in certain areas of the country, and we've always maintained they've existed. So maps were drawn up which showed that we didn't exist in certain areas, but now your archaeologists, your anthropologists are finding that we did in fact exist in areas where you said we did not exist. So I'll go back here and show you. This was partly to the extent of Iroquois territory. Now, Iroquois territory, as I mentioned, was structured, and the Mohawk people were keepers of the eastern side of that territory. In the western side, you had the Seneca people. And then in the middle, you have the Onondaga. And then close to the Mohawk, you had the Oneida. And the Cayuga were close to the Seneca. Now, these territories, as you see, run from the Great Lakes, this is Lake Ontario, following the St. Lawrence River up to Montreal. Now, we always maintained we went beyond that, and now your archaeological studies have shown that we did, in fact, about 100 miles north of the St. Lawrence, not only stopping in Montreal, where there was one of our major cities, we used to call them castles, but also all the way up to Quebec City and even beyond to Tadoussac. There is evidence now that the Iroquois people were inhabiting lands up to Tadoussac, along about 100 miles north of the St. Lawrence and adjacent to the Montagnais people, and then covering from there down to the coast of the Atlantic and touching on Mohican territory, which there was a conflict, and they were moved back when there was a conflict with the Mohican and the Iroquois people. So, as you can see, when I mentioned structured, it was laid out in that way. And Iroquois, these were nations. As you may not know or may know, the Iroquois society or confederation was formed because these groups of people used to have conflicts with each other, and they were small groups, and there used to be a lot of oppression from larger groups from the south and the north. So they decided to form what is known as the United Nations of Indians. And they went around and talked to, one man just had the idea, he went around to start to talk to all these different nations. And as over the years, they eventually formed the Iroquois Confederacy. And their country was laid out. As I mentioned before, the Mohawk became the keepers of the eastern door. When they had needed some reinforcements, they were helped by the Oneida. When the Seneca were the keepers of the western door, needed help, they were helped by the Cayuga. And when all needed, they had a grand council and they all worked together. The Onondaga was appointed the keeper of the fire, or at least the central government of this whole confederacy. In other words, this is where, when there was a need to meet all the nations together, they convened at Onondaga territory. So as you can see, the territories were quite large and extensive, and they were quite organized. If you can see, these are definite archaeological findings of Iroquois settlements in all these areas. We used to call them castles, these large areas, because they were large villages. And they were called, in our language, village is called ganada, means a larger than usual village. And then you had some small areas where you had supply places, and then as you can see, these were well inhabited by our people. And then they extended, and here some of them are not shown, along the Champlain and Richelieu rivers. There were, and then ending up here, and then all along. In your history books, the people of Kahnawake, for instance, supposedly came along from New York State along the Richelieu and up to Montreal. But now it's proven that we were already in these areas. And I guess we don't blame you, because historians, to suit their purposes or to suit the purposes of their governments, will write history in such a way to show that nobody existed in these areas. And this is what happened to us. A lot of your history book says, oh no, you came from New York State area. For instance, when I mentioned you in my introduction of these programs, I said I was president of Indians of Quebec Association. I remember when I started organizing with the other Indians, this organization, the government used to tell the other Indian groups this: don't listen to this guy, he comes from New York State, he's not even a Canadian, never mind a Quebecer, never mind, an Indian from the area. And I had to maintain, no, we were always from this area. So now the archaeological findings, for instance, Point de Buisson is here, not far from here, shows that there is an Iroquois site there for 6,000 years, or if not more. And then now, just yesterday in the paper in Quebec City, there was an article which says that there is a village right in Place Royale. This is the place where Champlain landed. And they found, archaeological studies have found that there was a village there, and they're going to make a study of this area in the near future. So the Iroquois and our territories were quite extensive. I explained this to you to show you that now Kahnawake, which became from a people which covered this extensive area, even beyond up to Tadoussac, now has been located and recognized by non-Indian law, the government of England or France, which said we had a 28 square mile, and then even shrunk further to be 4 by 6 miles, and then even shrunk further because within this 4 by 6 miles includes all those other rights of ways which I explained to you earlier, the seaway, the tower lines. So we do not have that much territory really to exist on. And what we're trying to do with the territory that remains to us is we're trying to develop it. I guess the reason why we existed and survived in Kahnawake as opposed to what you could call survival on other Indian areas. You know, other Indian areas still do hunting and fishing, but they rely a lot on welfare or so-called welfare from government. You know, the government says, don't go hunting and fishing, we'll treat you well. So if you're living in the north, what do you mean by treating well? You know, they didn't have any houses, they didn't have anything. So what was the government give them except food? But they got the food, they had the food already there. So our people here live close to this city. We've been living next to your people, or you've been living next to us for 450 years, if not more. And we survived. And why we survived is because we did not listen to the indoctrination. You know, people says, well, Indian people can't do work like ordinary people or non-Indian people, but our people in Kahnawake traveled to the United States and all over the world to do steel work. They became proficient at it, and they maintained their existence. But now that our people are wanting to stay with their families more, as you know, this type of work requires a lot of travel, and people do get tired of traveling. We want to do something in our own area. So we're taking steps, but as you can see, we don't have much territory to develop. So, and then with some of the restrictions we have in financing, we have to do with what we have to develop ourselves. So with the small areas, we start our own businesses, and we start our own industries. For instance, one of the major industries, insofar as my people are concerned, I'd like to see developed on our lands, is what is specifically Indian. The sale and production of things that are identified as being developed by Indian and Amerindian people. And for instance, the crafts and arts, if they are left to our people to develop, we would be able to make a satisfactory existence. But if we have to compete with cheaper made products, then it makes it pretty difficult. So our land is important to us. What we have left is important to us. And then if you hear anything about Indian people making land claims, that's the reason, because we have so little and we have so much to do. And when we believe that we have good ideas for this land. And we hope that in the future you will come to understand our desires. Our desires are just to help ourselves to maintain our culture and traditions, not to interfere with anybody else. In other words, it's simply saying we don't want to bother anybody and interfere with them, and we don't want anybody to bother and interfere with us. Thank you.